So good afternoon and good morning. Welcome to the AGREE discussion series. For those of you who are joining by webinar, we are about to start, and you can submit comments by clicking the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. A recording of the webinar will be emailed to everyone after the event. So we're going to start off with some opening remarks by AGREE Executive Director Deborah Atwood.
Yes, hello, and welcome everyone, both online and here in the office. Gosh, there's not much happening today, is there? I just printed out the 850-page Farm Bill, and I'm combing it now. You know, I'm channeling a lot going on today. I have to think that this is becoming a trend with our discussion series, because last month when we were holding our discussion series, it was in the middle of the Kavanaugh hearings. So I think that we are definitely setting a trend here. Yes, I want to first welcome our AGREE advisors who were with us from the get-go. I thank you. And then the partners that joined us with our Conservation Task Force, I do thank you for joining us. I wanted to also say kind words about the presenters. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy lives to be here to talk about this. I think is complicated. I'm hoping you're going to make it simple for my brain to understand how blockchain technology can be used. A little bit about the AGREE initiative. It is housed here at the Meridian Institute. I serve as Executive Director of AGREE. I have for almost 8 years. We are all about harnessing the power of diverse people, thoughts about transforming food and agriculture into the future. Our high-level recommendations can be found on our website. What was born out of that work was a focus on our conservation and data integration work. And I'm pleased to announce that we have provisions in the Farm Bill, and I am really proud of the fact and hard work that we were able to get language that lays the groundwork for future research and future discussions around the integration of agriculture, conservation, risk, yield, data. So with that, I want to give a shout out to those of you that worked on it with us, and to the Congress for taking leadership on the subject. And we look forward to working with the administration on implementation there. I had to just give a little call out there because it's all breaking news. So AGREE on its mission, as I said, we have our recommendations on several subjects on the website, but today, how this all works towards what we want to accomplish in the future is really dependent upon emerging technologies and how they can, in fact, be applied in a way that really benefits mankind, not only from tracking foodborne illnesses, but actually looking at how, when things are planted in the ground or animals are born, how all of that flows through our system, and how we can learn about the applications for future work. I think a little bit about the Meridian Institute. We're a nonprofit organization that brings people together to find creative solutions. We also do strategic planning work. I also wear another hat and do other work on other subjects related to issues around seafood and coastal work, but climate work as well. So enough about AGREE, Meridian, and the Farm Bill. Let's turn it over to you, Heather, to move us forward and introduce our panel. Thank you.
Great, Deb. Thank you. And welcome, everybody. We're so pleased that you can be with us. It's great showing here in the room, and I think there's I don't have the exact numbers, but about 50 folks around the country joining us via webinar. My name is Heather Lair, and I'm a senior mediator with the Meridian Institute, and I'm also the director of our Washington, D.C. office. It's great to have you here with us in person and remotely for this discussion on blockchain applications for agriculture. And this afternoon, we're going to unpack a little bit the Blockchain 101. What is it not, and sort of what are the applications for agriculture. We're going to focus today domestically, but there's certainly a lot of implications internationally as well. I'd like to thank the Cerna Foundation for their support of this event and the discussion series, and for making it possible. So thank you. So just to get into it, Deb mentioned that our Conservation and Crop Insurance Task Force has been hard at work on the Farm Bill and looking at ag data and how to harness it both for producer and natural resource benefits. And as we've sort of delved into that through our discussion series this fall, blockchain definitely caught our eye, and thought, this is something we want to learn more about. How do we get smart about this? And through the lens of the work that Agree has done on things like research and data and local and regional food systems, it raised a number of questions for the Agree team and others. How can something like blockchain help producers of all sizes? So we're really thrilled to have two producers with us on the panel who are going to help us explore this and sort of see the practical and present application of the technology. And it also seems to have, as I mentioned, local and regional food systems. It has the potential to support values-based agriculture. So things like animal welfare and sustainability and workers and wages and working conditions. So this isn't an area where Agree has made policy recommendations, or we think we're going to have recommendations, but our objective today with all of you is really just to unpack blockchain, understand how it might be used, how it is being used, how it might be used, and then educate ourselves about potential governance and policy issues, which has been an area where Agree has been active. So just to go real quick over our agenda for the session and then introduce our panelists, we're going to do a bit of a blockchain 101 just to make sure that we're all kind of on the same page and people aren't kind of left behind. If you don't really understand what blockchain is, we're going to give you a quick intro via video from the Center for International Governance Innovation. It's a Canadian think tank on global governance, and they have a pretty good 101. So we'll watch the video. There'll be a couple minutes for any clarifying questions. We won't talk about implications, but just watch the video and see if there's any quick questions folks have. Then we're going to get to hear from these folks who are using blockchain and thinking about policy and governance issues every day. So I'll introduce them, and then right after the video, we can roll into their remarks, and then we'll have time at the end for about 40 minutes of discussion. So be ready here in the room and those on the phone to pose your questions. And I'll note that the folks on the phone and the webinar, you were sent a little while ago some bios of these panelists, but very quickly. Right here, we have Benita Carlson, who is a rancher from Northeast Wyoming, and she's using blockchain in her cattle operation. And she's going to tell us how she's preserving the identity of her grass-fed beef and how she's leveraging blockchain-related investments for other purposes. So great to have her here. On the webinar, you'll see on the screen, we have Tejas Bhatt, who's the Senior Director for Food Safety Innovation at Walmart. And they launched their Food Traceability Initiative this fall, which provides end-to-end traceability powered by blockchain. So it's exciting to hear from Tejas, and maybe he can reflect for us on the most recent romaine lettuce recall and sort of what their new platform might do in the future when such a thing happens. How might it reduce waste and uncertainty and improve public health? So that's Tejas. Then we're going to hear from Cody Hopkins, who's down at the end of the table. And he is the CEO of Grassroots Farmers Cooperative in Arkansas, and he's also a producer himself. And they're using blockchain to track poultry, pork, and beef from farm to fork. So he's going to show us an app where buyers in the supermarket can actually know where their food was processed and also produced. So pretty exciting. And then last but not least, Dave Rajewski here in the center, who is the Director of Technology, Innovation, and Environment at the Environmental Law Institute. He's a longtime Meridian friend and thought partner who scans the horizon on emerging technologies and helps policymakers and others think about the implications, the unintended consequences. So we're excited to hear his thoughts and reflections on blockchain. So with that, I'm going to have Annie tee up this Blockchain 101 from the CG, which is the Center for International Governance Innovation.
Many people think of blockchain as the technology that powers Bitcoin. While this was its original purpose, blockchain is capable of so much more. Despite the sound of the word, there's not just one blockchain. Blockchain is shorthand for a whole suite of distributed ledger technologies that can be programmed to record and track anything of value, from financial transactions to medical records or even land titles. You might be thinking, we already have processes in place to track data. What's so special about blockchain? Let's break down the reasons why blockchain technology stands to revolutionize the way we interact with each other. Reason number 1, the way it tracks and stores data. Blockchain stores information in batches called blocks that are linked together in a chronological fashion to form a continuous line, metaphorically, a chain of blocks. If you make a change to the information recorded in a particular block, you don't rewrite it. Instead, the change is stored in a new block, showing that X changed to Y at a particular date and time. Sound familiar? That's because blockchain is based on the centuries-old method of the general financial ledger. It's a non-destructive way to track data changes over time. Here's one example. Let's say there was a dispute between Anne and her brother Steve over who owns a piece of land that's been in the family for years. Because blockchain technology uses the ledger method, there is an entry in the ledger showing that Adam first owned the property in 1900. When Adam sold the property to Dave in 1930, a new entry was made in the ledger, and so on. Every change of ownership of this property is represented by a new entry in the ledger, right up until Anne bought it from their father in 2007. Anne is the current owner, and we can see that history in the ledger. Now, here's where things get really interesting. Unlike the age-old ledger method, originally a book, then a database file stored on a single system, blockchain was designed to be decentralized and distributed across a large network of computers. This decentralizing of information reduces the ability for data tampering and brings us to the second factor that makes blockchain unique. It creates trust in the data. Before a block can be added to the chain, a few things have to happen. First, a cryptographic puzzle must be solved, thus creating the block. The computer that solves the puzzle shares the solution to all of the other computers on the network. This is called proof of work. The network will then verify this proof of work, and if correct, the block will be added to the chain. The combination of these complex math puzzles and verification by many computers ensures that we can trust each and every block on the chain. Because the network does the trust building for us, we now have the opportunity to interact directly with our data in real time. And that brings us to the third reason blockchain technology is such a game changer. No more intermediaries. Currently, when doing business with one another, we don't show the other person our financial or business records. Instead, we rely on trusted intermediaries, such as a bank or lawyer, to view our records and keep that information confidential. These intermediaries build trust between the parties and are able to verify, for example, that, yes, Anne is the rightful owner of this land. This approach limits exposure and risk, but also adds another step to the exchange, which means more time and money spent. If Anne's land title information was stored in a blockchain, she could cut out the middleman, her lawyer, who would ordinarily confirm her information with Steve. As we now know, all blocks added to the chain have been verified to be true and can't be tampered with, so Anne can simply show Steve her land title information secured on the blockchain. Anne would save considerable time and money by cutting out the middleman. This type of trusted peer-to-peer interaction with our data can revolutionize the way we access, verify, and transact with one another. And because blockchain is a type of technology and not a single network, it can be implemented in many different ways. Some blockchains can be completely public and open to everyone to view and access. Others can be closed to a select group of authorized users, such as your company, a group of banks, or government agencies. And there are hybrid public-private blockchains too. In some, those with private access can see all the data, while the public can see only selections. In others, everyone can see all the data, but only some people have access to add new data. A government, for example, could use a hybrid system to record the boundaries of Anne's property and the fact that she owns it while keeping her personal information private. Or it could allow everyone to view property records, but reserve to itself the exclusive right to update them. It is the combination of all these factors, decentralizing of the data, building trust in the data, and allowing us to interact directly with one another and the data that gives blockchain technology the potential to underpin many of the ways we interact with one another. But Much like the rise of the internet, this technology will bring with it all kinds of complex policy questions around governance, international law, security, and economics. Here at the Center for International.
Okay, great. Thanks, Annie. So that was a quick overview, and I guess if you're a lawyer, you might be frightened because it says no more intermediaries, you know, but obviously implementing that we're a long way from that, but it's pretty awesome to think about changing the way we transact information, and certainly the implications for things like healthcare data and financial transactions, and certainly the supply chain things we're going to talk about today. So does anybody have any burning questions or things that just weren't clear to them, or you'd like to sort of get off your chest before we hear from these experts about how they're using it? So I need a microphone. Jason, where are you? Where are you? Oops. Rex, can you just give him this microphone? Dan's gonna, there he is, it's in the back, sorry. Jason, could you give the man on the corner there, Dan, raise your hand. He has a question.
Thank you, and thank you for allowing us to ask a question at this early moment. I find that when this is so complex that sometimes the questions will linger in my mind, and I'd like to get it before we launch any further. Can we go back to the part about where everybody confirms everybody else's identity and everybody gets in the soup and enters data or answers the puzzle and that kind of thing? Question that occurs to me is, what's the incentive for anyone to want to verify data unless it values them directly at that moment?
Who would like to take that?
Effort, and it's distracting, and you have to think about it.
Yeah.
So what's the value proposition?
So with BeefChain, which I'll speak about in a moment, what we're trying to do is obviously add value to what our producers are producing, which is beef. Why is it an incentive for them to partake in something like blockchain? Because, I mean, I tell you, like Wyoming Rancher, can you imagine blowing their minds like, blockchain? Why it's value added for them, though, is because end consumer wants to know where their beef is coming from. They want to know that it's USA. And so what we're trying to do with BeefChain is to get the producer a little added kickback. Yeah, you might have to get a little tech savvy here, or we'll sure help you do that. But when October comes, or November, when you sell your calves, it'll be well worth it.
It grows out of a commonality of interest among all of the stakeholders, so that they know that as long as they're participating, they're continuing to move the needle forward, so that everyone can benefit along the chain. Is that the underlying rationale?
Correct.
Okay.
And I think there's distinctions between a public and a private blockchain, which I think some folks will get into, that these two producers are on a private blockchain, so it's not as sort of open and transparent to everyone. So there's differences there in terms of incentives. Other sort of clarifying questions? Yeah, go ahead.
Just real quick, in the case of sort of the classic application, Bitcoin, if you solve the puzzle, you get the coin. And that's the thing that actually drove people to do this. And it became harder and harder to solve, do the encryption and solving the puzzle. And that's why you have these massive farms, mining farms. They actually use mining as because you really have to dig hard to get that next coin. So part of it is also with the cryptocurrencies, they made it really difficult to do when you have to actually solve the puzzle to get the coin.
Another clarifying question.
Actually, just to make a point, just the video, I think, expressed that you secure transactions on the blockchain through this proof of work or mining. That's only one method of doing it. For permission blockchains, it's unnecessary.
Correct.
So there's different ways of validating transactions.
Right. Thank you for that clarification. All right. Now, one more question, and I think we're going to go to our panelists. Maybe folks could identify themselves too. It'd be helpful.
Hi, I'm Roy Parazaf from the World Bank Climate Change team. I guess my question is maybe going to be covered later, but what's the value addition of using blockchain over existing kind of cattle tracking systems where previously you could probably see where the food is coming from? Is it more granularity? Is there something else in it?
Yeah, I think maybe I'm going to ask you to hold that and just get to it when we get to your remarks, because that is a great question. Why can't you just use the database? You know, we have lots of distributed other technologies. Why do you need to go to blockchain? So what's the value add there? So, okay, with that, Benita, I'm going to turn it over to you to tell us about what you're doing in Northeast Wyoming.
Well, first of all, I wanted to thank Meridian Institute for having us, and thank you all for coming. They said, I'm Benita Carlson, and I'm a rancher from Northeast Wyoming, so to be here in the big, big city is quite intimidating, but thank you for having me. So I guess I wanted to start with just a little story, and it's a story my fiance told me about when he was younger and riding with his dad. And it really put it in perspective about this paradigm shift that we're talking about, blockchain. So him and his dad were riding along, checking cows, and riding horses, of course. And there was an old piece of fence line, and it was really old hand-cut cedar posts and really old surplus barbed wire, and it was tattered, not doing its job anymore. And his dad said, you know, I think we need to replace this fence line. And Drew said, well, Dad, aren't you nostalgic about that? Like, your grandpa hand cut that cedar post and put this fence in. Like, it's history. It's part of what we do, or what we've done. And he said, son, it isn't serving its purpose anymore. Ranchers have been doing the same thing for over 100 years. And they've been kicked in the shorts for it for over 100 years. So that's, I guess, why we're so excited in Wyoming about blockchain and what it could potentially bring to the producer. And that is a more intimate relationship with end consumer. And I believe end consumer is awfully excited to have a little more intimate relationship with producer. One thing I'll tell you that most people don't know is that currently packers can buy tons and tons and tons of beef from foreign countries such as Brazil. And so long as it's packaged, going from quarter to steak packaging, in the US, they can put a stamp on it that says USA beef. That's disgraceful to us ranchers who pour our blood, sweat, and tears into making sure that what we produce and what you all are feeding your families is the very best product. So it was last legislative session that Wyoming, the state of Wyoming, actually passed a block of bills or chunk of bills, 5 different bills, that made it possible for blockchain businesses to effectively operate within our state. So in looking at the bills, I kind of scratched my head with my fiance. We're sitting here scratching our head going, well, how could this fit into our operation as ranchers and raising beef? And so what we came up with is that blockchain is really just a ledger, as the video said. And so the question isn't what can you put on a ledger, it's what can't you put on this ledger? And so we kind of started thinking about, well, how could we provide some solid traceability, so what we're producing to the end consumer. So what we started thinking about is how can we make sure that people who are buying our product know where it comes from, this pasture to plate concept. A while back there was cool country of origin labeling, and it kind of fell flat on its face. So rather than country of origin labeling, why not do pasture of origin labeling, so people can know exactly, you know, this calf was born on the Pearson Ranch, did not receive hormones or did not receive antibiotics. And so that's what we're most excited about. From the producer standpoint, public safety and health reasons, as Cages is going to talk about, Walmart is experimenting with their leafy greens. It's kind of what we're doing with meat. You know, if there is a recall, blockchain is instantaneous. It's not weeks of or you know, hundreds of man hours trying to figure out how are we going to keep the public safe. It would be more of an instantaneous thing. And I think end consumers, honestly, you know, they want to know how the animal was treated. And what the animal was given or not given, antibiotics. So what we've done is we're working with the USDA and through a PVP program that we're putting on the blockchain, which most producers are already doing PVP, running program calves is what it's called. So we're just adding it to the blockchain so then it's more secure. And that information will go with an RFID tag that's in the calf's ear and also has a QR code on the tag right to the end package, which will have, you know, the QR code that's the identifying number or tag number for the calf. And that's put in either at calving or at branding. So the calf isn't, it's literally pasture of origin. Generally, ranchers brand or process their calves for the first time in the pasture that they're born in. So it's time-stamped, location, everything. Thank you.
So do you want to the question that was asked about why you can't do this in another way? Is there why this is different? And then maybe I thought maybe it was also interesting to share a little bit about how you're also using those tags for other reasons.
Okay.
Would that bit? If you don't, you have your 5 minutes. You're great.
Ooh.
You're succinct. So yeah.
Okay. Why blockchain is a better option is because it's more secure. It's more secure, and also it's easier for us to get that information to end consumer. So does that answer your question?
We need a microphone for you because they can't hear online.
I guess the bit I was thinking about was watching the video before. It was very clear how a ledger works, and we've all seen those before. I'm just trying to understand what additionality really comes out of that. I mean, was there a security problem before, or was it just the paperwork was too big, or there were no databases that worked, or the input out? Again, as someone who doesn't come from a technology background, I'm just fascinated to understand.
Yeah, it's absolutely. So previously when we've done program calves at the ranch, a person, stranger, comes out with a clipboard and a piece of paper and a pen, and they proceed to ask you questions, this question, that question, what's this, what's that? And as you're telling them with their clipboard, you have no idea what they're writing. You have no idea where that data goes after they leave. You don't see them again till the next year. And so it's the producer's opportunity to have a little bit more control over data that they're sharing, and to who and when, in a really secure way. Mm-hmm. And then, so the other next generation kind of forward thinking with, since we're putting the RFID tags already in the calves, which is a radio frequency ID, those have about a 2-year lifespan. So we were thinking, you know, we as producers want to be the best stewards possible of our land. So how could we make this even more attractive to the producer? Well, if we have a RFID tag already in the calf's ears, or say we put it in the cow's ear and start tracking them in the pasture, and it pings so often, and you have an app on your phone and you can look and see, this cow hasn't gotten up for about 12 hours. I better go check her out. If you save one cow's life, just one, you could potentially pay for every tag you would put in your whole herd that year. When you're talking about, you know, making sure your land is being productive, if you don't have productive land, you're not going to have productive cattle. If you don't have productive cattle, the bank will take your place. I mean, that's just the way it is. So taking care of soil, taking care of your water resources, really managing your range is huge for producers. And so say you have an app that's tracking your calves' movement around a pasture and notice, they never really utilize this one end of the pasture. Well, then you actually have concrete data that you can look back and say, maybe we need to drill a water well there, or, you know, what is it that's going on? So that's just kind of a next generation, I guess, concept that we're looking towards. And the other way that would tie in with what we're doing with the PVP is currently, if a producer gives hormone or gives an antibiotic, say, in an antibiotic-free herd, okay, that animal needs to be pulled from the program. They need to be, you know, they're not qualified then to be sold as antibiotic-free. Well, with the QR code on the tag, a rancher, and we did this with a couple animals we did treat for sickness. Once we gave the antibiotic, you simply scan the QR code on my phone, instantaneously uploaded then to the blockchain, and then I have concrete record of, on this date, this is what was given to this animal for this reason, and they are disqualified from the program. So.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, I think we're going to move now a little further afield from Wyoming to Walmart. and hear from Tejas Bhatt, who is in Bentonville, I believe. And you can see from the screen how he feels about blockchain. I think, right? In blockchain, we trust what it does, right? But Tejas.
Thanks, Heather. And thank you, Meridian Institute, for inviting me to be a part of this panel. I regret not being able to be there in person, so thank you also for accommodating my remote participation. I'm delighted to be a part of this panel and talk to you about a little bit about what Walmart is doing with blockchain. And some of my comments are going to echo exactly the same sentiments that Bonita just presented to you. For us, we didn't start with the question, what can blockchain do for Walmart? I think that's the wrong question to start with. We started with the question, what is the problem we're trying to solve? And then we sort of looked at what are some of the enabling technologies that can help us solve that problem. So for us, within food safety, protecting our customers is our #1 priority. So we looked at the business problem of identifying food safety risks earlier in our supply chain, because typically by the time the food gets to our distribution centers or our stores, it's too late to put any food safety interventions in place. And as we started to dig into identifying risks early in the supply chain, it led to the next obvious question, which is, do we know what a supply chain even looks like? And that's where this whole initiative around traceability, transparency, and visibility in our supply chain started. So we spent 2 years testing, learning, and scaling blockchain technology to answer exactly the question that was asked at the start of this panel, which is, why is blockchain any different than traditional database approaches? And I'll talk to you a little bit about why we think it's different. But it was only after 2 years of learning where we not only tested the technology, but also made sure that it can scale to the scale that Walmart needs, right? So we intend to apply this technology to across all our international markets as well. So as you can imagine, that's a large undertaking for all our food supply chains. And we tested this with about 24 commodities before we rolled out the initiative formally, just to make sure this can scale across multiple types of commodities, multiple types of business processes, production processes, types of supply chains. And what was interesting was, while every commodity was different, the challenges associated with traceability, whether that's commingling of products, whether that's traceability back to the farm or the ranch, all of those were very similar issues that we had to overcome. And because we didn't have the option of sort of starting from scratch and redesigning the global food traceability system, we had to work with and leverage existing investments in technologies. So as Bonita mentioned, using the RFID tags that are already there to send data to the blockchain, we're taking a similar approach here, which is we're looking at what data already exists within our supply chains and how can we get more efficient and effective at utilizing the data to make better food safety decisions. So in September, 2 months ago, we formally launched the Food Traceability Initiative at Walmart, and we're starting with our Fresh Leafy Greens Initiative suppliers. So interesting enough, the large romaine outbreak that we had earlier this year in March or April of this year was the primary motivating factor for starting with Fresh Leafy Greens. We did not know that there was another large one that was coming in November. But honestly, Heather asked me this question before we started this panel, and I get this asked a lot. How would it made a difference if we had all our Fresh Leafy Greens suppliers on the blockchain today, when we were responding to the most recent romaine outbreak that happened, that it's still ongoing right now? And there are two things I'll say to that. One is, I'm glad that Walmart is not building a proprietary blockchain system that we are asking all our suppliers to put data into, because we really think that this is an ecosystem approach. We're using a permission blockchain, we're using a private blockchain, but we're working with our competitors. We asked Kroger and Wegmans to join us. And in fact, now Carrefour is also a part of this ecosystem, because we believe that as we build this ecosystem, as we can track and trace all leafy greens and eventually all foods across the entire industry, not just for Walmart, it's going to change our response to these kinds of large outbreaks. So first of all, regulators would not have to put out large advisories like don't eat romaine lettuce across the whole nation. They would be able to get back to the root cause of the problem much more quickly. A couple of proof of concepts we did. It took us about 7 days to trace a package of mangoes back to the farm. By putting that data, the same data on the blockchain, we enable the ability for Walmart and anyone else in that supply chain to get back to the farm in 2.2 seconds. Now, if regulators could go to any retailer, any food service operator and trace back the romaine in 2.2 seconds to where it came from, they would be able to narrow it down much more quickly and would not have to issue these large advisories. Secondly, when they were able to narrow it down to the California growing region for the most recent outbreak, we then as Walmart, because we would have had all our leafy green suppliers and foods on the blockchain, would be able to more surgically recall, or not recall, but withdraw the romaine that was from California within our facilities. So whether it's at our distribution centers or at our stores. So instead of throwing away all romaine, causing a lot of food waste, we would have the precision and the accuracy and the confidence and trust in the data that we know where that contaminated or potentially contaminated romaine is. So it would help make a big difference in how we respond to these kinds of outbreaks as well for Walmart. And I think those two are sort of go hand in hand, the ecosystem approach and the individual company approach as well. Why is blockchain different? Why is it different from traditional database systems? I like to use the analogy of filling out a crossword puzzle with pencil versus with pen. When you're filling out a crossword puzzle with pen, you're going to be a lot more careful about what you put down on the paper. What we're seeing is an improvement in our data quality and data accuracy because our suppliers and supply chain partners know that when they put the data on the blockchain, it's there forever, right? It cannot be changed without detection. And so they're being more careful about the data they put in. So that's number one, better data quality. Number two, it's consensus-based, right? So no individual entity controls that data. And what that means is even Walmart cannot unilaterally change the rules of the game about the data ownership, data governance, data privacy, data permissioning, all of that stuff. And I think there's a larger play here that might address another question that was asked earlier, which is, if you look at society in general, if you look at consumers in general, they're losing trust in these large centralized organizations, entities, authorities, whatever you want to call it, whether that's big food, big pharma, big government, big tech, right? And I think that by allowing the consensus mechanism to have independent and maybe competing parties verify the transactions, verify the data on the blockchain, you are then creating assurances that this isn't controlled by any single type of entity or any single group of entities. And it is rather a distributed consensus mechanism where we might have NGO partners that are verifying some of the transactions. We might have conservation or environmental NGOs that do some of that. We might have standard setting bodies that do some of that. So having a mix of a diversity of consensus building mechanisms allows us to then create assurances with our customers, the consumer, that the data that we're sharing with them eventually can be trusted and is not controlled by one single entity. So I think for us, the longer term plan or the main driver is food safety. Our customers, the consumer, already expect this level of visibility. When they buy something from Walmart, they're asking the question, do you really know where this is coming from? And to Bonita's point, any claim that we make, whether it's organic, it's GMO free, it's antibiotic free, we now have the power to prove, or at least have the data to prove that those claims are valid and that we stand behind them, right? It doesn't mean that we don't have the power today. It just means that there's a lot of paperwork we have to go through, the paper trail that we have to follow to verify those claims. So the last thing I'll say before I turn it back to you, Heather, in the interest of time, is the regulatory agencies came out and said the romaine industry should label the romaine growing region and harvest date before consumers should buy it. Now, labeling is one thing, but how do you know that it's accurately labeled? How do you know that you're sure that the labeling can be trusted? And I think that's another example of where the data from the blockchain can be weaved in with existing things that we're doing to just create greater assurances that we're doing the right thing for our customers.
Great, Tejas. Thank you. I did have one follow-up question for you. Maybe you could just, I think this gets to the question before about why would you do this, or what are the incentives for people along the supply chain, for your suppliers to participate in this? What's in it for them?
Oh yeah, thanks for reminding me to talk about that, Heather. I think it's important to, again, I briefly mentioned the fact that Walmart is approaching this differently from our other initiatives. Typically because of our scale and our size, it's easy for us to say, hey, suppliers, put in all your data into this Walmart system, and Walmart gets smarter with that data. Walmart makes better decisions with the data. But to Bonita's point, she has no idea where that data went or what the data was used for. This time around, what we're saying is we're going to share value back with the suppliers. So in terms of the value proposition, while we're asking for visibility back to the farm, for the first time, our suppliers will get visibility down to the store and eventually to our customers when they buy their products. So what that means is they can now start doing some analytics around which markets are selling more or less of their product, what is the customer feedback they're getting on the quality of that product, and all the other things that we can do to allow the customer, our customer, the consumer, to make better purchasing decisions that align with whatever values they hold dear, right? So whether that's they care about sustainably grown, or they care about slave labor free, or whatever that might be. So it's allowing, blockchain is allowing us to have this two-way shared value proposition in an instantaneous fashion, right? So again, I think that's where our suppliers are seeing value. And in fact, what we have seen already is because the data accuracy is improving from the supplier side, they are now able to make better business decisions for themselves across supply chain efficiencies or whatever that might be. So in the proof of concept that we did with mangoes, for example, we were getting lower quality mangoes, and it was easy for us to perhaps blame the mango farmer. It was only with this end-to-end visibility that we saw there was a 4-day bottleneck at import control or at border control. And it was then we identified that we were losing 4 days of shelf life at the customs, and it had nothing to do with the farmer, right? So the farmer was maybe unfairly being targeted for lower quality mangoes when they had nothing to do with it. So again, these kinds of things are coming out where we can then put in practices to speed that up and give a better quality mango to our customers, whereas also being better partners with our mango suppliers, for example.
Great, Tejas, thank you. Okay, so now we're going to shift gears again and go back to the U.S. production agriculture, Arkansas, and Cody. What are you working on?
Hey, so I have some slides. Oh, good. All right. So you're the one. Okay, who's moving the slides? Got it. Oh, hey, up there. Hey. Hey. So yeah, I'm the CEO of Grassroots Farmers Co-op, also one of the founding members. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having us. And I'm going to echo a lot of what's been said already and kind of show our application. Again, so when Grassroots started to explore implementing this blockchain technology, we were very focused on traceability and giving our consumers more information at the point of purchase, and saw this as a interesting technology that we could employ to help do that in a more credible fashion. And so we do not actually develop the technology ourselves. We partner with a company out of the UK called Provenance, and have worked alongside them to develop the application that would work for our farmers. Grassroots is we work with small scale livestock farmers in the South. I live in Arkansas too, so 2 Arkansas people here today on the panel. We work with farmers in Arkansas, farmers in Missouri, farmers in Kentucky, and some farmers in Kansas right now. And we help those farmers improve their production practices, and then connect those farmers to markets and ensure there's a value chain in place to make sure that all of the processing and packaging needs to be done. And what we've been able to do is work with our farmers and our processing partners to be able to develop an end-to-end solution that ends up at the package level, showing traceability on a blockchain-powered platform. So I'll go through that in these slides. You can go to the next one. So we've talked a lot about trust already. There's sort of a crisis of trust. I think this is the Edelman study that comes out, I think, about every year. Consumers want to see more information on the label. They want traceability, and they expect brands and companies to get better at labeling. I read a stat recently that I think it was done from a study last year, only 1 in 3 Americans trust the food system is safe. And so it's there's a real crisis of trust in the food system, and certainly that's something that the grassroots, and it sounds like everybody here is working to sort of overcome. So go to the next one. There we go. So grassroots from the beginning, we've been very, we're a very small company compared to Walmart and a small supply chain, and have been committed from day one on being radically transparent with our customers. And showing, who raised it, how it was raised, what it was fed, and who it was processed. And so we were looking for a solution that would help us do that better, a platform. Now, it didn't have to be blockchain to be, but there are some benefits I think that Tejas has mentioned around the consensus building mechanisms and the sort of peer-to-peer versus a centralized data, centralized source of truth versus the peer-to-peer way that you can sort of build a chain of trust. And so we were very excited about using blockchain and the Provenance platform to be able to take what we've been trying to do through our marketing as, basically the marketing team on Grassroots, sort of telling this story, to being able to use the Provenance platform to be able to tell that story through the use of the data that is captured throughout that process. Go ahead to the next slide. Can you get a little closer to your mic? Sorry. Yes. Yeah. So, I just pulled a picture off of, this is a package of chicken breast. This is not ours. And this is typically what you see. There's just very little traceability. You're trusting that front-facing brand. And that's what we're trying to break down here, is getting away from, all these claims that say, all right, well, it's organic, it's humanely raised, they show you a picture of a farm, but really you're just sort of, there's no way to dig into this. In many cases, it's hard to find a country of origin, label, let alone, traceability back to the farm or the processing facility. In some cases, they can't even do that. It's very difficult to, there's such an opaque environment in the grocery store when you go in trying to understand more about the foods that you're purchasing, the products you're purchasing. And, we have the Grassroots customer base are people who really care about the sourcing of their products. And they want to know more about the story behind the products, and they're willing to pay a premium for that. And we feel they deserve to know. We need to provide them with as much information as we possibly can to help them make an educated choice. So here's how Grassroots has sort of done it differently. So there's a lot of stuff on this here, but the main thing here, related to blockchains, we've always had a farm of origin stamp on there. Well, that sounds great, but in this situation, you're trusting Grassroots to say that, well, it is, that's the farm of origin. We also have the QR code that a consumer can scan, and what pops up when that happens is, next slide, is so in partnership with Provenance, we've developed this user interface that allows consumers to be able to trace the journey from farm to fork on a blockchain-powered platform. And basically what's happening here, this is a shadow chain. It's not the system of record. We're not running our accounting system on blockchain technology right now. So it's a shadow chain that's showing the transfer of assets through that chain and it's being, this data is being input in a distributed way, peer-to-peer, basically, where the farmers are, when they take a batch of chickens to the processor, they're registering that asset we're actually on a public chain right now, the Ethereum blockchain, and that's being transferred to the processing facility. And then when the processing facility verifies that, they accept it, and then that's when it's sort of this like peer-to-peer moment where it's confirmed that what the farmer did and what the processor did, they agree, and then that's when it gets registered formally on the blockchain. And then that happens throughout the process through packaging into inventory, and then when we partnered with a food service company in San Francisco that also registered on the blockchain, so they can transfer basically all the way, or track it all the way from farm to fork. And when a consumer scans that QR code, they're able to to see this journey. And then they can also, drill in and learn more about each company along the way. And so, what this creates is that sort of transparency in a very distributed way versus one company saying, okay, here's what happened, we promise. And there's still opportunities for fraud in a system like this, but there's first of all, the data that's entered is immutable. And so, going back to the crossword puzzle example, there's, people take this very seriously, and there's this sort of, I think, a level of trust that's built through this peer-to-peer structure of how the farmers and the processors and the distributors all, everybody's reputation is on the line here in a very public way. And so now there are lots of other ways you can build more credibility into the system, and we're working to do that with third-party certifiers in the future and those kinds of applications. But we're very excited about, where this technology can go. Not just, we initially stepped into this focused on the consumer-facing side, really wanting to be more transparent with our consumers. But then you can start to see how you can build in smart contracts, quick payment systems, a lot more information in this. And you end up essentially sharing Grassroots as a co-op, we're open book, finance company. We show our staff and our farmers and our partners, we're very transparent, radically transparent, we would say. And what this allows you to do is start to almost share a accounting system across the network. And with permission blockchains, you can start to have permission, parts of it, you don't have to share everything, but it allows you to have a ledger that grows across the entire network that can capture all kinds of information, not just the asset transfer, but other aspects of or details about the journey of that product. So.
Great, and I guess I'd just ask a quick follow-up question for you. It was something we talked about before the panel. It's not, obviously blockchain is not perfect, it's not omnipotent, it doesn't know everything. So what are there needs to still be trust within the system, right? And there still needs to be verification so that if you, at the processing facility, they could put it on the wrong label or something. Like how do you get over that to ensure that sort of, from Missouri to California to that supermarket, it's really what they think they're buying?
Yeah. So when you start working with a physical product that exists in the world here, it's not quite the same level of just trust it no matter what. There's things can go wrong, people can make mistakes, but the reality, so there are a couple of things that I think help build that can help sort of build trust in that system. One is third-party certifiers. The other is the sort of consensus mechanisms that are built into, two parties agreeing that, like the processor and the farmer, agreeing that what was dropped off at the processor was actually what was, so it's peer-to-peer there. And there's a really a big incentive to not get it wrong, because when you're taking and, what's been traditionally, the supply chain has been, it's been opaque. No one knows really what's going on down chain, and you open that up for the public to see. There's a different level of accountability, and if something is mislabeled or there is a recall, exactly. You can trace it very quickly what's going on, and it exposes the entire value chain. So there is certainly some risk associated with, from a branding standpoint, with this. So.
Great, and I see Tay just nodding his head. Yes, and I think so. Basically, there are human interactions also underpin this in relationships, in addition to sort of the power of this, of the blockchain. Yeah. So I want to have time for questions and discussion. So we have our last set of comments from Dave Brzeski, and so David, it does sound like a bit of a new world order, and sort of somebody who studies this, maybe you can help us think about the questions that we need to be thinking about for agriculture.
Okay, thank you for having me. What we're trying to do is just get a sense of stuff, how much stuff is going on out there, because this is just a small piece of a huge, huge portfolio of things. So there's hundreds of millions of dollars being invested in this every week. We actually have an inventory of energy and environmental applications of blockchain. Every few days we're putting in new stuff. We literally can't keep up with it. So you need to think about this because there's an incredible amount of sort of, I would say, innovative churn here, which is good and it's bad, trying to figure out what's going on. But I mean, somebody once told me that sort of the internet of everything needs the ledger of everything. Right? That's the big deal here. The other thing is this is going to have an incredible impact on anybody who does digital transactions. If that's your job, you're in trouble, right? Because the whole purpose is kind of to disrupt the intermediaries, as we've seen. So I'm just going to go take you through a little bit of things that I've put together. A friend of mine is a computer scientist, says, when you think about it, think about this as a stack, right? So at the bottom, you have this ledger, you have an operating system. It's kind of like Android or OS. People are going to build a lot of things on it. You don't have to spend a lot of time here, right? Somebody's going to do this well. It could be IBM, it could be some other companies. The next thing that comes on top of it, go ahead, are these assets, right? And we've talked about those. It could be Bitcoin, there's Climate Coin. Climate Coin is just the numbers, basically tons of certified carbon. Somebody's pulled out of the air and verified. So you need to think about this. And this is the interesting thing about this is we need to get our heads away from the coins or the idea that this is a currency problem. Next one. So there's this identity, QR code. This is something we put an identity, we put attributes in, right? It could be cattle, right? It could be kilowatt hours, H2O, carbon, whatever we want. And then we start adding attributes and traits. It could be, is this GMO free? How do we figure that out? How do we certify it? So there's always this issue of certification, authentication that's going to follow us around. The other thing we haven't talked much about is executable contracts that you can put in self-executing contracts. These could be optimized through artificial intelligence. So there's all of this stuff going on behind there where you're using blockchain with something else, right? If it's tracing, you're using blockchain with QR codes, RFID tags. If you're in the insurance agency, you want to do risk trading, you're going to use blockchains with artificial intelligence and machine algorithms, right? And on the top are these apps, which you saw, right? And this is an area where I think people have to spend more time because you want to make sure that the user experience is a good one, right? And I think this is something that we ignore to a certain degree. We're not putting a lot of time in it. There's a lot of really bad things in terms of user experience. There's a lot of good ones that people are going to compare this to. So it's actually important to figure out these distributed apps that sit on top of the stack. Okay, let's just look at some examples. Next one. These are just some food and ag examples of RIPE. RIPE is supposed to be kind of the blockchain for food. You know, it's temperature, humidity, food chemistry. You can pack an awful lot of stuff in this. They just got 2.4 million in funding, right? So you got these small startups that are beginning to get a lot of money. Beef Ledger is Australian. Essentially, they want to produce the blockchain for beef in Australia. So you also have stuff going on internationally. You've got to keep your eye on the global system. And they actually have their own, this is an integrated sort of provenance and purchasing system. So they have something called the beef token, which is like the Bitcoin, except it's beef, right? And you can actually use that to do purchasing. IBM's Food Trust, a lot of apps are getting built on that. You know, they're just basically use the IBM Hyperledger and building a lot of stuff on that in the food system. That's not all. I mean, that's just a small sample. Next one. Let's go into some of the rest of them. Go ahead. First one. This is Exergy. This is energy. So there's a group of people in Brooklyn now that are essentially, they have photovoltaic systems on their houses. They're just trading energy using blockchain. So they're inside the public utility grid and they just do their own trades. Right? So they have to figure out how do you actually interface with a public utility, but I'm trading, it's a blockchain for kilowatt hours. Right? So I'm just trading kilowatt hours. Think about that. But this is something, there's a lot of those, this is Waste Ledger. So this is sort of reverse supply chain. They're using for electronics, for construction material, waste, oil, house. They're actually going through the supply chain. The supply chain is $40 trillion globally. So this is where you're going to see the most use cases. So even if you're doing something in food, there might be incredible stuff going on in the supply chain that you could learn from or use or just co-opt or buy if you want to license it. Because you're going to do inbound, outbound logistics, procurement, eco-management of the supply chain. Next one. Bitland. This is a land trust blockchain in Ghana. There's an incredible amount of land that has no ownership. We saw that in the beginning one. So in Honduras, 60% of the land in Honduras, they can't track the owners. So that means there's no particular motivation to conserve, right? The other one you're going to see is a lot of things that bring people. There's 2 billion people on Earth that have no banking services. So blockchain's a revolution for those people. They can't bank. And so if I'm using market-based incentives to drive people to change their behavior, I have no way of getting them financial incentives. The last one is another platform. This platform targets the global sharing economy. They want to disrupt Airbnb, Uber, Lyft, all of these folks. They want to make it easy to build sharing platforms that allow you to find something you want to do, rent it for a short period of time, pay somebody, and basically track reputation. Right? Have they done a good job or bad, 4 stars or 2, right? Everything a sharing app does, they want to provide the platform that disrupts all of these folks. Okay, sounds good. Next. Sounds good, but let's go through some of the things that make this difficult. Scalability and computational power. Bitcoin right now is using 2.5 gigawatts of power. That's about the power equal to Ireland. Could go up to 7.5 gigawatts. That's the power used by the country of Austria. So there's issue of scalability. There's lots of ways of getting the power use down. We talked a little bit about them. You can sort of block, you can essentially cut a block and use part of it. Depends on how you built your consensus mechanisms. But this issue of scaling and computer power. The other one is speed. So if I'm using Visa, I can do 2,500 transactions a second. If I'm using Bitcoin, it's 3 to 5. Because I have to do all of this kind of consensus building on 5,700 nodes around the globe. Again, there's ways of doing this faster. Ethereum is another basic sort of system that they use to build these on. It's 15 to 20. It may not make a huge difference. It may not mean, you may not need a lot of speed, right? But if speed's the issue, you have to think a little bit about that. Next one. Security. So there's a sense that everything is perfectly safe here. As you go up the stack, it becomes less safe. Right? So the penetrations into the system may come at the top, where you can come in through the apps. So you have to actually think about the entire stack. Any computer scientist will tell you that. So there may be ways of actually getting into the top and getting the encryption keys. So you actually have to figure out security in the entire stack. Next one. Robustness. Okay, this is what you're seeing now, even Walmart, I think, these are all pilot projects, right? Think of those as pilot projects. So the issue is, how are they going to scale? How can you take your example from 4 states or 5 states and make it entire US, right? And is it going to do that? Is it'll crash? Even Walmart sort of opening this up to lots and lots of other competitors. There's this issue of how will it scale? And I think that's important. Should be one more here. Maybe it's not. Okay, I mean, there's one more that didn't show up, but I'll tell you, this is the most important one, and that's standards and standards and protocols. Right? There's a social issue around these. It's not going to be solved technologically. If you're trying to figure out how to get all of your folks into the system, you're going to have to create some sort of social mechanism. So the reinsurance people right now have set up their own, essentially, consortium called B3I to develop their own protocols. Any of you that do work on IT know that a lot of great IT systems fail because the systems can't talk to one another. It's great on paper, but we can't get them to talk. And sometimes it takes years and years to solve this sort of interoperability problem. So anybody that wants to do this now has got to figure out socially, how do we organize people? So you can get the verification in, you can get all your suppliers. The more heterogeneous the supply chain and the larger it is, the harder that's going to be. Right? If you can stay within a particular chain, it becomes easier, but it's a non-trivial thing. So part of it's technological, part of it's just organizational. And we can talk a little about that. Then there's this whole issue of should we regulate? All right. So I'll stop there because I think there's enough there to start a conversation.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. That was terrific and a whirlwind there, but I think gave us a flavor of where it's being used in food and ag and sort of some of the pitfalls and challenges as this accelerates, it seems, across all sorts of supply chain and other applications. So we want to see if folks here in the room have any questions or comments. I have a couple from the phone, from the web. If I see a hand back there. Go ahead, and please identify yourself.
Sure, Daryl Blakey with NCBA. So I've got a question for Cody and Bonita. So have you guys seen increase in demand by using this product? And also, have your producers, I know you being in a co-op, you probably have an array of producer groups. Have they seen premiums added to their bottom line? Has it been useful, or are you waiting to see those results? And Bonita, too, within your blockchain, are other ranchers in Wyoming on that, or is it just for your operation as well?
Sure. So, it's not something that we see, and we don't have consumers come to us saying, please, can you get on a blockchain? But it is something that has piqued a lot of interest. A lot of our customers just generally like, I think this is the way it's going to be used in the future anyway, right? No one's going to deeply understand blockchain. They just are, they like the aspect of being able to scan the QR code and sort of trace the journey of the product. And I think that, doing that and the traceability we offer has certainly helped us. We get really positive feedback from our customers, and it's helped us grow our business. And we've built our business on trying to drive as much value as we can back to the farmers, and that really hinges on us being able to give consumers. They're really adding value to the consumer side. And so, we don't have clear numbers to show how much blockchain technology has helped, but, we pay farmers about 70 cents of every dollar that a customer buys from us goes back to a farmer. Average in agriculture is 14 cents. And so, that there's all kinds of things that play into our ability to deliver that kind of value back to the farmer, not just blockchain.
Great question, by the way. So we operate on a private blockchain, and what we've done with our PVP verification is added a piece to it that's called Wyoming Certified Plus. And because when we were starting thinking about this, thinking, well, what's going to be the incentive for a producer? We really want to get our producer some more money, because when you think about it, if you sell your calf in the fall at 900 pounds, okay, then it's got several more months in a feedlot, and it's going to gain hundreds of more pounds. Okay, producer only got 900 pounds, or $900 at the beginning. And then by the time it's in a grocery store, whoa, it's disgusting as a producer. I can tell you to go in the grocery store and see how many dollars per pound a piece of meat is being sold for, and knowing what I got when I sold my calf. So that's really what has driven us and to do a private blockchain, is we really want to be able to get some more incentive back to the producer to have this data available to end consumer. Are other ranches doing it? Absolutely. The Pearson Ranch and Pumpkin Butte Ranch, the two ranches I'm involved with, are just two kind of trial run partner ranches. But I can tell you, all across the state of Wyoming, we get phone calls on the daily. How can we tag our calves under beef chain? We had a panel actually a week and a half ago down in Torrington, Wyoming, which is close to the Nebraska border. And after the panel, there were several Nebraska ranchers that approached the panelists and said, how can we become beef chain? And we said, well, you don't really qualify. You're not in Wyoming. But, the other producers are really looking. Actually, interestingly enough, Taiwan bought the first beef chain cattle just last week. We sent our first shipment over. Taiwan is hugely interested in. They want all beef chain beef, all of it that we can produce. And so that's been one barrier, is when you think about changing a supply chain or tweaking it or having a paradigm shift in how we do the supply chain, we're having a problem with keeping up with demand. And it's just not just nationally, but internationally.
One more comment. Yeah, I think one of the issues that you face, and we face this a lot of times with lots of emerging technologies, is the consumer has to go from what the hell is this to that's cool, I want one, right? And right now, we don't do a lot of consumer education. And so I think it's difficult for small people, for small firms to do that. So it may fall on the Walmarts, it may fall on governments to do that. But that has to change, because you want people to say, this is really interesting and important. And I want to actually choose products from companies that are using this, right? And that's a much bigger lift, but that's the kind of transition that happens, or it needs to happen. And we had that with nanotech, with parts of biotech. Eventually people kind of got it. The other thing is, I don't think there's a killer app yet. I hate to use that term, but it's sort of like, wow, this is kind of super, you know, where are these and where are the companies or people that are using this? So I think there's a huge lift that has to be made, and it's not clear immediately who's going to do this on consumer education, because that helps everybody that are using these things.
Yeah, Dave, that's a really good point, just because, you know, one of the risks we run into is if we expose all the data to the consumer, it becomes overwhelming for them. So it's actually creating a better experience for the shopper. We're all shoppers, right? We don't have the time to look at all the data on the blockchain for every purchase we make. So how do we create that balance is really an important issue.
Great. Okay, I just saw like 20 hands go up here in the room, and I have a couple of cards, and we have 20 minutes. So I'm going to ask people to be really judicious in their use of airtime, and then maybe we can do fit for purpose with the right, you know, one or two of you answer, and then we'll just try to get through as many as we can. So I saw Dan, and then maybe you guys could come up here, and then we'll go over there, and then we'll do one on from the web. So, Dan.
How do you get rid of a bad actor, and is there some way to keep a bad actor from simply joining another blockchain?
And this is sort of a related one from the web. Somebody was saying blockchain seems inherently secure due to the mathematics, but there must be variability in quality. I think this is of the platform between different market providers. Is there a need for industry standards as more people move into this space? You know, provenance may be good, but is there somebody else that's not delivering? So I don't know if you can loop those together, guys. Who wants to take it? Bad actors, standards?
I can take it if you want, Heather.
Yep,
so
great, take it.
A couple of things to that. It's a great question, and I don't think we can really eliminate that risk, but we minimize that risk with two things. One is we are running a trusted private permissions blockchain, right? So this is not anyone can join and anyone can transact in an anonymous fashion. They have to prove their physical identities before they can participate in the virtual blockchain. So that's one way to minimize that risk. The second thing is the consensus mechanism that we have built allows us to flag nefarious activity or activity that is out of the ordinary. And the governance that we put on this blockchain will then dictate, you know, when does someone get kicked out of the blockchain ecosystem because of bad activity or a bad actor, and how do we prevent them from rejoining that ecosystem? I think to your point, depending on other blockchain ecosystems that evolve in the future, there will be an opportunity for them to jump from one blockchain to another. But as Dave mentioned, once we have interoperability, which needs standards, which requires standards, we should be able to minimize that risk as well.
Great. Maybe we could take a quick, yeah, you have a mic here, and then we'll go over here to this row, Rex.
Yeah, this is I'm Todd Miller with ChromaWay. We're a blockchain software company. But a question for Tejas and Cody, in terms of data sharing, because you both mentioned that either on a co-op or at Walmart with your competitors, how are you sharing data? For example, you show on your supply chain the sources of your produce. Is that okay for Kroger to see that? And how are you able to validate, how is the network able to validate transactions among your competitors? So, and what are the challenges you face there?
Yep. Cody, do you want to go first?
Go for it.
Okay. So great question.
Yeah.
So first of all, because we have permissioning on the blockchain, we actually don't allow Kroger to see our data, and Kroger doesn't allow us to see their data. However, because the consensus mechanism, the governance of this blockchain is the same, what it allows us to do is it allows us to, in the future, this capability does not exist today, but in the future, if we get, let's say hypothetically, bad romaine from one supplier, we can flag that supplier for the ecosystem and allow Kroger to be notified of that even before we can do it through any other mechanism. So that's one way. The second thing I can say is because of the way the consensus mechanism is set up for our governance, for our blockchain, we need at least two parties to the transaction to validate that transaction, so no one can unilaterally put in data onto the blockchain. So a supplier cannot just say, I sent 10 shipments of this to Walmart. We need the distributor, the transportation company, and Walmart to sort of verify that, yes, that there were 10 cases of that shipment, in that shipment for that product. So again, it doesn't require the entire ecosystem to validate that transaction. So we don't validate Kroger's transactions and vice versa, but we do need more than one entity validating those transactions before they can be put on the blockchain.
And what I'll add to that, so we're using a application, an app that's been built on blockchain technology. We're not actually going in and taking the data that's been registered on the Ethereum blockchain and manipulating that in any way. We're using it like the people in the future will use this technology. They'll be using applications built on the technology, right? And so now I think that what we want to do is work with developers like Provenance to be able to customize an application that gives us more, takes that information. Right now it's set up to be used, takes that data and puts it in a very consumer focused way. The user experience is really geared towards the consumer experience, but you can also take that data and do other things with it that could be geared more towards, other players in the supply chain. And so, very, I think, different. We're using it at a very different level. We're not developing the technology. It's serving a real need for us, the application that Provenance has developed. So.
Yeah, the other thing I would just add quickly to that is the people that are using blockchain in the financial services area are doing a lot of work on how you use artificial intelligence for fraud detection. So you're actually looking to build in systems that detect these kinds of patterns of behavior that tell you something is going on. So, I mean, there's a whole bunch of things going on in terms of can the blockchain itself learn to detect this stuff? All right.
Great. I'm going to go to the front row here.
Yeah, hi, my name is Sean McGinnis with Coefficient. I think this question is probably for Tejas, and it's around, so not livestock, but other commodities like corn and soy and traceability. These types of commodities would go through maybe an aggregator. So, and looking at the challenges from farm to table, and have you guys encountered or trying to work through some of those traceability issues when you're taking, say, soy or corn from multiple farms, putting it through an aggregator and trying to trace quality and et cetera, et cetera?
Yeah, absolutely. This, and surprisingly, this applies to produce, this applies to dairy. It's all over the place, right? So we really debated this question inherently at the start of our initiative, which was to what level of granularity do we want to get to this? And how can we get more accurate without it becoming too cost prohibitive to do so, right? So what we're doing now is we're telling our suppliers that, look, we don't have to get to one-to-one traceability, right? So one item on the shelf to one farm it could have come from, right? That's too difficult. That's too hard to do right now. But let's narrow it down to it could have only come from one of these 5 farms, so that we don't have to deal with scenarios where regulators are coming out and saying, don't eat romaine from Yuma, Arizona, or from California, right? That's too large. That's too broad. How can we narrow this down to something that manages our risk better, recognizing we will not get down to 1:1 relationship between the product and the source. So the way we're approaching this today is essentially telling our suppliers, if you can trace it back and tell us it could have only come from these 20 farms, that's a big step up from what we have today.
Great, thank you.
Hi, I'm Elise Golan from USDA, and I have a question about the role of government. So do you see a role for USDA in either facilitating or policing or anything as blockchain is applied in agricultural and food markets?
Who would like to go?
I can start. Oh, okay. Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that the government can do is just get a sense of where it's going, right? So, I mean, I think having discussions with people is really important, especially, I think this idea of immediately jumping in and regulating is probably not the best thing right now. But I think the bigger thing, I was just at a meeting of the FDA Science Advisory Board, and we were looking at FDA was looking at how they create an enabling environment for cellular agriculture. All right. And not an easy thing, probably 15 years out. But I mean, I think the issue is just having some sort of discussion, continual discussion, and just keeping tabs on what's going on. Because I think there's so much activity. There also, I think internationally, you've got to be looking internationally, because I think a lot of the things that might be happening might happen somewhere else, and you want to know, is this likely, what's the example here, the case use that might come and be part of what's going on here, especially this issue of beef coming in from a foreign country.
Right.
I mean, I think that's a huge issue. I mean, the other thing that's on the horizon is just DNA barcoding. You know, the use of genetic coding, which is getting cheaper and cheaper. That might become part of this package of information. But I think a lot of it is just staying, so horizon scanning, having constant dialogues between the government, and also just keeping tabs on, because a lot of the first moves are going to be states, as we've seen. You know, they're going to run the experiments, and I think watching what's going on at a state level is pretty important. But certainly, it's hard for me to imagine that you're going to immediately figure out, well, we need to regulate this, and this is what we should do, right? It's almost like keeping tabs on stuff.
Can I add something quickly? I think it's, you know, as a meat process, we work a lot with FSIS, and I think that looking at how they could potentially participate in this at some point would be an interesting conversation, because they are essentially acting as a third-party, you know, certifier along the way, and it'd be kind of a tricky conversation, I assume, but certainly I can imagine it making a lot of sense too.
So Beef Chain, actually, we reached out to the USDA and said, hey, you guys have a wheel that we would like to use. We don't have to invent this wheel because it already exists, but we would like to put it on the blockchain. And so actually an interesting conversation came out of that. Now some of our program writers are in contact with the USDA, and the USDA is interested in potentially having their third-party verifications done via Beef Chain on the blockchain, because you can have an audit done in like 2 seconds rather than 2 weeks, right? So so that's kind of something that we've been looking at, and yeah. So I wouldn't recommend more regulation. I agree with Dave, but allow the ecosystem to grow, you know, and people who are hungry, I mean, they're going to reach out to wherever, you know, for help, and that's what we did with the USDA.
Okay, I've lost track of where the questions are here in the room. Rex, so we got Carl, and then where are we going next? Just so we can queue up some people. Okay, the woman here, and then I'll do a question from the web.
Carl Matson, wheat farmer from Montana. Wheat is an ingredient in just about everything that we eat. And the consumer is increasingly curious about how we farm the wheat. How would you propose to handle a grain like that? Now, you already mentioned if we can get it down to 1 to 20 farmers, but that probably isn't small enough to really get to the meat of what you want to do. But I don't know how you can implement this program and escape tracking the ingredients.
Yeah, a great question.
Do you want to do it?
Absolutely. Really quickly, I can tell you that, first I want to set the record straight. Dave mentioned that Walmart is also using this as a pilot. We're not. This is in production. We're using it on a day-to-day basis. And in fact, of the 2 dozen or so commodities we're tracking on the blockchain, we're actually tracking multi-ingredient products, which have ingredients that are also multi-ingredient products. So we've actually taken to that scale of complexity where we can track back the baby food product, not only where the puree came from, but where did the applesauce that went into that puree came from, and which apple farms did those applesauce made from. So we can track this back to that level of granularity, but to your point, we could only trace it back to 1 of 19 apple farms and not to the individual farm.
And there's going to be an inherent tension between like operations and cost and trying to figure out what batch sizes you're doing here. Because when you start to aggregate, so one of the things that made it easier for grassroots to do this, we were already batching. We already had the systems in place where we were batching and had ID numbers that went back 1-to-1 to the individual farm. And so, and we too are actually, I mean, every single package of chicken that goes out is being traced on the blockchain, just to clear that up. But and beef and pork too. But I think that tension will be there between sort of operational efficiencies and the ability to trace, because there is these moments where you do have to aggregate in commodity markets especially.
Thanks. Anna Fraser with the State Department's Trafficking in Persons Office. I just wanted to ask, because a couple of you actually did sort of allude to the question of worker welfare or forced labor. And I think we're wondering if there is a space for this technology in that space, in the worker welfare, in getting information, not just back to the producer, but then to the workers who are actually on the farms or in the fields or whatever. And if anyone is looking at that or thinking about that at this time.
Yeah, I can take that if you want. I don't want to dominate the conversation, but we've actually done some work in this area. So our social responsibility team is also looking at using the same platform because, as you can imagine, we need to know where the product is coming from before we can actually do all the other corporate social responsibility metrics that we've committed to. A quick example, one of our strawberry suppliers actually has the ability to track not just which farm the strawberries came from, the package of strawberries came from, but they're also tracking it to which individual farmer picked those strawberries or handled those strawberries on the farm. Now, they don't share that data with us, but they have that data uploaded to the blockchain for their own use because they're tying it to worker payments and worker productivity. So you can just take that one step further and do more with worker rights and worker welfare as well if you wanted to.
Great. Other questions here in the room? I have again lost track. I will go to one from the web. So this one's for Dave. Can you talk about the blockchain inventory? Who is creating, maintaining, who's participating? Is it an inventory or consortium that will lead to collaboration of shared interest groups? Sort of what's the vision for this? I guess.
So this, basically we're doing this as part of a larger grant we got from the Sloan Foundation that looks at the energy and environmental impacts of the digital economy. Environmental Law Institute is actually creating it and maintaining it, but it'll be a public resource. So we go in and we, essentially scan for these things, do some due diligence on what are they, do they seem real, is it a real company, that sort of thing. And then if it looks like it's real, it's worth sharing, we'll put it into the inventory. So the inventory is essentially done in spreadsheet form, and we're getting ready to actually launch it on a website. So it'll be available to anybody. And what we may do eventually, we've done this with other inventories, is crowdsource so that people can actually send us examples that we don't see, because eventually you're overwhelmed by all the stuff that's out there. So we've done that with other inventories we've done on nanotechnology and whatnot. People that are actually sending us, I saw this blockchain, I'd like to see you put it in your inventory, and that way you actually get a sort of global radar system. And then the idea is obviously to share this with people that are using it, want to find other people, obviously with the government, with potential regulatory agencies that want to find out what's going on here to make it much easier. So basically it's funded by a independent foundation. We have no particular advocacy role here. It's just a matter of getting the information together, put it into a form that you can access.
Thank you. I know we're really running out of time here and folks have to get back to the office, so I'm going to help us wrap up here. There were a number of unanswered questions from the webinar participants, and I would just promise, make a commitment that we would get those answered, and we'll share those out afterwards. If the panelists would indulge me to make some answers. They're interesting and they're sort of far-flung about trade and international supply chains and smallholder farmers. So they're really interesting, and I think people want to unpack this even further. So at this point, I'd like to thank our panel for just some really terrific insights and helping us think about this and where this might go and where it is today. So thank you. Agree to those of you on the webinar and here in the room, we really hope you'll join us at a future discussion series event. I just wanted to promote that there are two coming up in the new year. One is on the non-insured crop disaster assistance program. So this is looking at non-insurable crops and whole farm revenue, sort of risk management tools. So I think that will be an interesting discussion perhaps in the January or February timeframe. Maybe not quite as sexy as blockchain, but we do our best. And then there's another one on pasture, rangeland, and forage insurance and integrated livestock systems. So be sure to check this out in the new year. I want to thank everybody again for making time for this. We'll have a blog and the recording posted later this week or early next, as well as answers to these questions that we were unable to get to today. So thank you again, and feel free to stick around, have some more lunch, visit, network, etc. But thank you. Thanks, our panel.
Thank you.